5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Hello, space enthusiasts. My guest this week is the founder and CEO of another prominent new space company. It's Payam Banazadeh from Capella Space. Capella is a remote sensing company that is using what is called synthetic aperture radar, or SAR technology. Don't worry, we'll explain what SAR is during the episode. The important summary is, it allows you to see at night and through cloud cover. You can imagine that has interesting and important use cases. Payam will take us through those use cases and many other things about Capella. Enjoy.
My name is Raphael Rodkin, and I'm an investor and advisor to space companies. Just as a reminder, this podcast is for informational purposes only, and nothing should be taken as investment advice. This podcast is sponsored by Nano Avionics, a satellite manufacturer and mission integrator. Their technologies enable many space companies worldwide to offer services that improve life right here on Earth, such as providing global connectivity, conducting Earth observation, or contributing to scientific discoveries. Check them out, and also check out my episode with the CEO and co-founder. Sadly, I am not a rocket scientist, but I'm an alumnus of the International Space University. ISU offers a number of educational programs about space worldwide. Check them out at isunet.edu.
And just some final things before we start the episode about ourselves. If you enjoy the podcast, please leave us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast platforms such as Apple or Spotify. If you want us help expand our work, you can do so and support us at www.patreon.com/Space Business Podcast, and we'll also put that link in the episode notes. And lastly, you can follow us on Twitter at podcast_space. Hey, welcome back, everybody. It's finally time for another episode of the Space Business Podcast. I was traveling quite a bit the last few weeks, hence there was a couple of weeks without an episode. But here we are today, and I'm super excited to have Payam Banazadeh, the CEO and founder from Capella Space, with me. It's somebody I've been wanting to have on the podcast for a while, so really happy he's here. Welcome, Payam.
Thanks, Rafael. I'm super excited to be here. I haven't done one of these podcasts in a very, very long time, so super excited to do one, and I'm excited to chat with you.
But this is fantastic, because if you haven't done one in a while, it gives you a chance to update everybody about all of the exciting things which are going on. Talk about Capella to our thousands of listeners in now over 100 countries on all continents. So it'll be exciting. Payam, let's start in the usual way. Could you give us sort of the, let's say, elevator pitch on Capella, please?
Yeah, sure. We are a remote sensing company. What that means for those in your audience who might not know is we look at Earth from space, and we have sensors on our satellites that are pretty unique. We have 7 satellites as of today. That number is going to change in the near future. And these satellites, the sensors that we have on them are synthetic aperture radar sensors, or SAR in short. And SAR has some unique capabilities. It can penetrate the clouds, and it can do imaging in all lighting conditions. So we can do imaging daytime, nighttime, but we could also do imaging using our SAR sensor no matter what the weather conditions are. We can see through the clouds. We can see through a thunder, rainy season, fog, smoke, haze. And that really gives us an ability to monitor our planet from space in all conditions, reliably and effectively all the time. That's in short what we do. Obviously, there are use cases for it, what we can get into, but we are a remote sensing company that has essentially built an end-to-end solution from the satellites all the way to sensors and the data platform to be able to do this.
Okay, so how did you wake up one day and decide, okay, I need to put satellites in space that can see through clouds and at night?
Well, so I am an aerospace engineer by training. I studied aerospace in my undergrad. I got my bachelor from University of Texas at Austin, Hook 'em Horns. I then went to NASA Jet Propulsion Lab, and I worked there for a couple of years with a focus on small satellites. And so over there, I was a project manager and a system engineer, and in the formulation department, where missions essentially get started and get conceptualized. A scientist comes in and says, I really want to do this. And then the engineers are trying to design a mission around the needs of the customer at the time being a scientist. I left NASA JPL and I came to Stanford to get a graduate degree. And at the time, frankly, I actually wanted to get out of the aerospace industry because I thought it was moving really, really slow and it was highly bureaucratic. And all my friends who had joined software companies, things were moving so fast. They had already done 5 launches of different products. And that seemed just really attractive. When I got to Stanford, one of the things that happened in the world that got everyone by a surprise was there was a massive Boeing 777 that crashed and went missing. It was a Malaysian flight.
Oh yeah,
This 2014, if you remember.
Yeah, MH370 or something.
MH370, correct.
Yeah.
And what was just really confusing to me, not knowing much about how these things work and what do we do when a plane crashes, was literally CNN and Fox News and every single outlet was talking about it every single day for a very long time. All the countries, US and others, had deployed lots of assets in the area to go find this plane. And we couldn't find anything about this plane. And that was just really confusing. And so I started asking the question of what is it that we do to monitor our planet from space? And, this is back in 2014. Companies like Planet and Skybox, who are doing optical imaging from space, had already put up satellites in space or they're about to. And I found out so much about what we're doing and also so much about what we're not doing. And one thing that really jumped out was synthetic aperture radar, or SAR. And it just appeared that all the other sensors, primarily optical, have come a very long way since the first time there was an optical satellite that was put up in space. But SAR has just been stuck in the past. And not only that, SAR has some unique advantages that optical just doesn't. And so the ability to be able to see through clouds and at nighttime will give you a very reliable monitoring capability from space. And so as I started pulling that thread, what I found out was if you could have a constellation of SAR satellites that gives you an ability to monitor anywhere in the world, anywhere on this planet that we have, reliably every hour of every day and every night, no matter what the weather conditions are. So you can essentially do it all the time. That would be a game changer for not only governments, but also a lot of the commercial companies. And no one has done this. No one has been able to get this done for lots of different reasons. And so that was the inception point for Capella, where we started the company 6 years ago with the mission to change that paradigm and bring in transparency and essentially reliability to monitoring our planet from space.
Okay, so, I mean, you're right. I'd almost forgotten about MH370 because this is quite a few years ago, but it is kind of concerning if one thinks about it, right? Because I mean, this happened to be a civilian plane, and it's obviously tragedy, but it could have also been a hostile aircraft of a strategic competitor. So was there really no government capability around to track this? Well, I appreciate that SAR satellites right now are, different, new space element, you're going for commercial use cases we will talk about. But was there no government SAR capacity, even if it was ridiculously expensive and archaic and something like that?
Well, this is the crazy part, which is our own government, US government, does not have enough SAR capability to be able to monitor, forget about a plane going missing, critical hotspots around the world that they need to monitor all the time. They're not able to do so because they don't have enough SAR satellites, and therefore they have these massive gaps in their coverage. And and that's the U.S. government who's spending the most in terms of the space budgets that they might have. And so there's a real gap. Now I gotta also just put a caveat here, which is having a constellation of SAR satellites is not really the best capability to find missing planes. There are other sensors that are much more effective. There's ADS-B and others. But really, something going missing and us not being able to immediately capture images of that area, essentially minutes after we know something has happened, is what really piqued my curiosity. And we don't have that. Even to this day. We've launched satellites. We're going to have to launch more satellites to get there. But even today in 2022, we don't have sufficient coverage of our planet practically in near real time for us to immediately have eyes in the sky to see a change that might be very important. And that's just, to me, that's crazy.
Yeah, that does seem like something that should be fixed. I mean, maybe to just sort of put some sort of rough numbers around it. I mean, if you're looking at sort of let's call it quote unquote interested area of the world where you would like to have that capacity, right? I mean, what is sort of how often does a satellite fly over that at the moment? What's the revisit rate there? A SAR satellite?
Well, so let's start with optical. So optical, it really depends on the area. If you're talking about the cloudy belts, right? Like, anywhere between 10 degree to minus 10 degree latitude, optical just can't see any time. It doesn't matter because it's cloudy all the time. It turns out 50% of Earth, by the way, on average is cloudy, and those clouds are obviously moving around. And so whenever it's cloudy, doesn't matter how many satellites you have, and doesn't matter where those satellites are flying over, you can't see under the cloud. So that's 50% of Earth on average out of the question. Then you've got the nighttime issue, and that's also, as we know, half of, about 12 hours, you don't get really great lighting. And so that's also out of the picture because optical satellites can't really do night imaging in a way that's useful. Some would argue, well, we can do night imaging, but it's not useful. Sure, it's great, but it's not. It's just like if you take your phone into a dark room, it's not going to be a good picture. It's just not going to look good. And so with optical satellites, it doesn't matter how many you put up, you're always going to have that limitation. Right now, the best revisit that we can find is going to be in the 3 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour on average. Now, there are areas around the world that's better, like the polar regions. We get a lot of coverage because most of the satellites are put in a polar orbit. These are orbits that go, essentially above the pole every 90 minutes. And so, there's a lot of coverage around the poles, but there's not much coverage in areas that really matters in the mid inclinations, in the, call it 30 degree to 55 degree, where majority of the population lives. It's best is maybe 3 hours, maybe 2-3 hours at most.
And you mentioned you have 7 satellites right now. So what regions are you guys covering, and what's your sort of like built up plan there, both in terms of geographic coverage and revisit rate?
Right. So our revisit is on average about 2-3 hours anywhere in the world. Again, on average, we're trying to intentionally focus in these hotspots that happen to be in sort of the, somewhere between, call it 35 to 55 degree latitude. Because what we have found out is, majority of action sort of happens in, maybe 10 regions around the world at most. Adding satellites into mid-inclination gives us additional coverage in areas where there's more change happening. And so, we've got 7 satellites up. 2 of them are in mid-inclination and 5 of them are in polar. And our plan is to continue having essentially half of our constellation in mid-inclination orbits and then half of our constellation in polar orbits, which allows us to balance the coverage over these hotspots versus, coverage, outside of these hotspots.
When you're using the term hotspots, is that sort of like political hotspots, or in what sense were you using that?
There's an overlap between the political hotspots as well as just, places where it's really dense in terms of population.
Okay.
And so, in general, you've got Southeast Asia that's of interest. You've got Middle East that's of interest. You've got Europe that's of interest. Those are the key areas that there is just a lot of action going on, and most people want to be monitoring these areas. And in fact, I could probably list 10 countries that most people want to be monitoring. And now those are mostly for government customers that have a desire to monitor certain areas over and over and over again. But even on the commercial side, if you're working with an oil and gas company, that has lots of critical infrastructure around the world, some of them are in areas that no one else is interested to look at, but a lot of them also overlap with some of these other government use cases. And that actually creates a challenge in terms of conflicts and capacity that's on these satellites, because if everyone is trying to look at the same spot, that becomes really hard to deconflict those requests and tasks that people might have.
Yeah, so that brings me actually to a question. So in terms of the usage of your satellites, is it pretty much basically always specific tasking for customers, or is it sort of like also you just go around and collect data, it goes into a database and people buy it off the database as they need it?
I would say 80% of what we do is all based on someone driving the tasking and someone telling us where they want to look. We don't just look everywhere. In fact, SAR satellites, just because of the nature of how they work, they're really power hungry.
Yeah.
So you have on any of the SAR satellites, even the $1 billion, school bus size government SAR satellites, they can't do continuous imaging. And so you have to pick and choose how you're going to use that capacity that you have on the satellite. Depending on your satellite, you have somewhere between, 1 or 2 minutes of the 90 minutes all the way till maybe 15, 20 minutes of the 90 minutes available for imaging. And we have a lot more capacity than our competition, as an example. So we per satellite per orbit. So we get to choose, we get to be able to put more tasking on every satellite on every orbit. But you still have to pick and choose which our customers are driving for essentially every day. We can change this and shuffle, what gets tasked. But then we have excess capacity, which we then, do some background missions to be able to build an archive over areas, again, that we think there is value over time if you build, an extensive archive for it. So, you have to be very picky on how you end up using the capacity that you have on your satellites.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember my EO lessons from the International Space University, but wasn't there something like that SAR, it has like compared to optical, it has a smaller swath, right? The width that you can observe. I guess that's what you're talking about, right? That you have to be more specific at what you want to look at.
That's a different. So the swath is essentially the size of the image, right? The width of the image as you capture it from space. That gets pretty complicated pretty quickly because on SAR, you can have different modes. In fact, you can have a wide swath that is really, really wide, inexpensive resolution. So, you can have a 10 meter, 20 meter resolution image that is 100-kilometer in swath, or in the width, which is much, much larger than, typical optical satellites. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is if you go to the physics of it, optical satellites these are passive sensors. They're just sitting there for the light to get into the lens, for you to be able to make the image. And so that doesn't require that much power to run that satellite because you're just mostly, the sensor is passive. On the other hand, SAR is an active sensor. And so every single time that we capture an image, we have to turn on our radar payload, which takes a tremendous amount of power. I mean, we're talking about kilowatts of power. This is not
okay. So it's not like your 50 watt satellite. Okay.
Gotcha. No. This is, every time you turn on this radar, kilowatts of power that you're consuming from your batteries that your solar panels have filled up, because of the difference in your power generation from the solar panel and then the power consumption, that's just so large that you can't have as big of a solar panel to go to cover the power generation equally. So most SAR satellites, in fact, if not all, are storing the power in batteries. And every time they're doing imaging, they're using the battery for the imaging as opposed to directly from the solar panels. And so every orbit is 90 minutes. And depending on how much battery you have and, how much power your payload consumes, you can only do a fraction of that 90 minutes in imaging mode. Whereas optical, you're essentially continuously looking down nadir and we're just imaging constantly. Now, that's also not true for some optical satellites, but for most optical satellites, you can essentially continuously do imaging. Whereas for SAR, you have 10 minutes of the 90 minutes, so you have to pick and choose.
Okay, which I assume that that must translate into a much higher price per. I assume the pricing is also something like per. How do you price? Is it sort of per image? Is it per area? How does the customer pay?
Yeah, so we have different business models. There is the per image or per tasking. There's the background missions, and there are different levers here on pricing. You usually put a price on what the customers value, right? That's just with SAR latency and how quickly you can not only capture but also deliver and be able to guarantee that. And so having a service level on how long it takes from the time that you capture to the time that you deliver, that's really where the value is for a lot of the customers. And so we have different tiering systems. So we can get you an image, and if you don't care exactly when you're going to get that image is going to be far cheaper than if you want to make sure that you get the image on some hours after it's collected. You want to guarantee it. You want to make sure that you're at the top of the priority list for us. So there are lots of different, I would say, bells and whistles on how you end up getting the image that defines what the pricing is. Traditionally, SAR imagery has been much more expensive than optical. Part of it has been because of the capacity constraints that you have on the satellite. So you have to monetize your business, and you have only 10 minutes of the 90 minutes. And so it's a much more expensive product because you have less of it available, and you still need to build satellites and put them up and whatnot. That's part of it. The other part of it is it just hasn't been flooded in the market by 7 different providers. And so, it's a bit of a supply demand at work there. But generally speaking, you want to always price your product based on value.
Sure.
And so, what is the value that the customer is able to capture, and then you price it accordingly.
Sure. Let's talk a little bit about those use cases. So, one obviously is the government use case. And I guess we've all sort of, sadly gotten used to the fact that ever since the Ukraine war started, it seems like every other news story has satellite image in there. So what I assume that is the key government use case is basically defense, national security, intelligence, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just be super upfront and transparent, and I've been transparent for the last many years on this specific question. When I started the company, the idea was we're going to go purely after commercial applications. That's why I started the company. In fact, I didn't know much about the government market around SAR. 2 years into it, what I realized was commercial is so immature when it comes to remote sensing. It's immature even in the optical market, and they've been at it for a very long time. And it's far less mature when it comes to SAR market, because SAR is just really complicated to play with. Now, it's a very rich data set, so once you figure out how to deal with it, there's a lot of value to be able to capture. But traditionally, because SAR hasn't been around and there hasn't been companies like Capella providing this commercially, there's a lot of education and training required to get the commercial customers up to speed. And commercial customers, they don't want to just get a SAR image. They want to get, some final product.
Insight.
They want a report that, tells them exactly what they're after. And they don't want the SAR image. And so on the other hand, though, governments have been using SAR for a long time. They're very familiar with SAR. They can consume imagery directly. You don't need to build anything on top of the imagery for them to consume it. You just need to be able to deliver the imagery at the right formats, the right time, with the right set of guarantees, because they're really big on making sure that they get that SAR image when and if they need it. And they have existential problems. And money for them is less of an issue, right? If you have a problem and you have a solution for it, they're willing to spend the money to solve the problem they have, because these are existential, massive problems. Solving them is priceless. It's just like if we can monitor a launch site, North Korea, and we can do this better than anyone else. We do it at nighttime. We do it at daytime. We can do it through smoke and fog and clouds. And we can fill those gaps for the governments. It's like how they would, what's the price tag for that, right? Whereas when you go into the commercial side of the house, you're dealing with people that are highly focused on their bottom line, and they really, really care about optimization and cost, and they already have a bunch of tools that they've been using, and you need to be able to fit your product within their workflow. And by the way, they can't consume the data. They got to, it just gets really complicated really, really quickly. And so we have focused mostly on the government applications as a first start. That's not the end goal. That is the first start. And we've decided to go after commercial applications by being very selective, only going after a few that we either very very much so believe in, or we have a partner who's really good at that last mile delivery of insight. So that's a slightly different approach than some other companies have taken, but that's worked for us so far.
Yeah, sure. And it's like you alluded to, even in optical, the government business is still a very large part. And we're also recording this actually on a day when the US Space Force announced the creation of an intelligence unit. So I think that demand is only increasing. But let's talk a little bit about the commercial side. So what are some example use cases, how people use SAR data for commercial applications?
Well, one of the superpowers of SAR is its ability to detect change at a very high accuracy. And so, you can capture two SAR images, and if they're captured with the right geometry, which is critical, and what that means is that you capture the first image, and then the second image getting captured either from the same satellite or another satellite needs to be captured from practically the exact same geometry as the first image was captured. So you have to control the satellite. You have to be able to maintain, an orbital tube to be able to fly in exactly where the last one. If you can do that and you put two images on top of each other, two of the SAR images, then you're able to detect millimeter changes between those two images in the Z dimension. So the surface deformations, you're able to measure the change in millimeter accuracy. And so some of the more exciting applications on the commercial side using SAR is to monitor critical infrastructures, bridges, buildings, and be able to, from space, see if there's any deformation forming in these structures. People are doing this today to measure how much the Millennial Tower. There's a tower here in San Francisco that's tilting, a couple of millimeters a year, right? I think it's now more. Must be a couple centimeter, but people are using SAR from space to measure this. And so, one of the things that I'm excited about is if we could monitor all the bridges in the world. You start with a state and you go to a country, and you're able to monitor all the bridges, all the critical infrastructures that we have, monitor them at a cadence. Maybe it's every quarter, and be able to now proactively provide reports to authorities and others who care about those infrastructures on the health of these critical infrastructures. You're going to save a lot of money by not sort of sending trucks and people and inspection. But more importantly, you'll be able to get ahead of a potential disaster or a fallout of some of these aging infrastructure that we have. So that's a really big one that I'm personally excited about. There are other applications around tracking changes, whether it's looking at deforestation, whether it's monitoring easements, whether it's looking at pipelines and other infrastructure. There are applications in insurance because when a disaster happens, assessing the damage from that disaster becomes critical, and the timeliness of that becomes critical, not only to the first responders, but also to insurance companies who have to go in and assess the situation and help financially. So there's been some work on the insurance. There's the typical use case around finance, being able to track commodities from production all the way to consumption and provide that information. Agriculture has shown quite a bit of potential. Now, agriculture, we do X-band SAR, which is a very specific frequency we use in our sensor. Other frequencies, you're able to measure moisture pretty accurately, and from there be able to imply something about the health of the crops and be able to optimize your irrigation for any crops that you might have. So there are very interesting applications in agriculture in the works that I'm excited about. So I would say those are the big ones, but none of them have gotten there yet. I think they're still at the early phases of piloting and demoing. But any of those standalone are very, very exciting.
Since I'm assuming you're sort of looking at Capella imagery every day, is there any sort of examples you remember of, whether it's both on the government or on the commercial side, any stuff that you thought was really cool, is like, wow, I wouldn't have imagined we can detect this, but we detected this, and this is really, really amazing.
Well, I think it has been, yes, there's been many. I mean, one of the coolest was the first one that we captured ever. And, just getting that first light from your satellite after you've worked on it with your team for 5+ years was just, and it looked really good. So it was, that was super exciting. I think that the most recent one and the most relevant one was over Ukraine. So we've been monitoring Ukraine for a long time, and we've been monitoring it even before the Russian invasion. And some of our imagery was used to essentially predict that Russians are about to invade, and this was all in the open domain, and so nothing classified. This is commercial imagery, and so essentially in one of our imagery, you could see the Russian tanks line up right outside the border and are starting to actually move. And that was before the invasion was declared. Anyone had called that this was about to happen, and our imagery was used to essentially verify and imply that, which was which just shows the power of remote sensing and being able to use space. And in fact, Ukraine is cloudy 75-80% of the time this time of the year. And so we were sort of the only game in town in terms of being able to, have this persistent monitoring of the situation as it was evolving. So that was pretty unique. The other ones that come to mind are volcanoes. And so there was a couple eruptions in the last year, and we were able to capture imagery through the volcano, through the smoke, and be able to actually see, the point of eruption, which we had shared with some scientists, and that was also really, really cool to see.
There was Tonga, right? Last year, I believe.
Yeah, there was a couple. I think that was one, and there was another one. I'm forgetting the name at the moment.
Yeah. It's interesting on the military side, right? I guess the other aspect is, it's really clear how strategic that capability is. Having said that, you guys have 7 satellites. Okay, there are some others. I guess it sounds also from a resilience point of view, we should have many more star satellites up there, right? Because obviously people do have anti-satellite weapons and the like. And by the way, is there sort of cybersecurity, jamming? Is there any other sort of aspects where that touches you guys? The sort of like hostile behavior of strategic competitors?
Yeah, we we take cybersecurity pretty seriously, and so it's not the last few months, there's been a lot of concerns around cyber as well as physical security, given that our products is being used in this conflict. But frankly, at this point, if you're a commercial company, even if you're not doing government work, you got to have a really solid cyber
Agreed.
as well as physical security.
Great.
And so if you're following the foundational work that you need to do, those are all already pretty darn good. And so we've been doing that for 5 years. So we feel pretty good about it. In terms of resiliency, I think this is actually a critical point, because the conflicts of the future are moving away from these massive juicy targets that we spend billions of dollars on, because they can be taken out pretty effectively. And it's moving away from that to having a much more resilient architecture where you're not dependent on any single node. You have enough of these nodes that even if 1 or 2 or 10% or 20% of them are taken out, not only you have additional capability already in theater, but you have additional ones reserved on the ground to be able to launch really quickly and be able to replace the ones that have been taken out for whatever reason. And you just practically can't do this. Your satellites or your ships or whatever assets, drones, these are really expensive, really hard to manufacture, and you only have a few of them. That just doesn't work.
Yeah.
And so with companies like Capella, where our star satellites are relatively low cost, they're easy to manufacture, they're small, we're able to provide a level of resiliency that has really, frankly, never been possible before. And so that becomes really, really critical, I think, in the 21st century.
How small is small? I forgot to ask that before.
We're 120 kilograms.
Okay, so like a small sat.
Yeah, it's a small sat. It's not a CubeSat. This is a small satellite. It's size of a mini dorm room fridge. But once it goes to space, it transforms itself into a pretty large structure and a satellite. So we have lots of deployable structures that come out after we launch in space.
Yeah, but the point being, in terms of resilience, I guess it's there's a number of even like very responsive vehicles that can take up your satellites, basically.
You mean launch our satellites?
Yeah, launch vehicles. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. No, we are compatible with every single rocket that's out there. Mine is. I mean, there's a couple that are, they don't have enough capacity on their payload. Very small rockets, but anything above that, we can launch on anything.
And by the way, I also forgot to ask: are you guys? It sounds like it's because of the technology involved. It's a relatively special type of satellite. So are you guys doing this all in house, or is any part of the satellite like off the shelf, like an off the shelf bus or not?
We do have some off the shelf components, but so we are actually three companies in one. If you want to think about it that way, we have company one is we're satellite manufacturing. We design, integrate, test our satellites, all of it. There are little components that we buy from others, but we build the entire payload system. We build our power system. We build our communication system, and we've bought a couple of things from others. But it's our design. It's our satellite. We built it, we've integrated, we've tested it. That's company one, like satellite manufacturing. Then company two is, we launch these on rockets that others have developed, like SpaceX and Rocket Lab. And then once they're launched, we have to operate them. And so now we're a satellite operations company. And that alone is pretty complicated because you have to automate all these and create all the infrastructure on the ground. And that's company two. And company three is, now that we have built the satellites, launched the satellites, operate the satellites, now we're a data company. We bring the data now like the business of processing the data and understanding how customers want to ingest it and how do we deliver. Now that's like a standalone complicated thing to do, and that's the third part. And the fourth part that we are just dipping our toes a little bit, we like to partner for this last mile, is being able to actually build software and analytics on top of the data, which is now your sort of analytics domain. And that's a complete separate challenge than the first three. There's lots of different things happening in one company.
And then the last part is, I guess, very important for the commercial customers. And let's talk about it in a minute. But I just want to come back to those 3 to 4 different companies. I mean, I guess at the moment, it sounds like it's always quote unquote bundled. And I can also see, for historical reasons, that at the time you guys started, there wasn't that much of a choice yet, right? In terms of unbundling that. I mean, nowadays, right, there's much more choice in terms of hosting on other people, even though SARS, I guess, more difficult. But is it always bundled, or have you guys, I mean, let's say there was some nation state, and again, this is a strategic capability, right? Maybe there's some nation state, like no strategic competitor, but somebody who's, friendly, but they still, hey, we want to operate this ourselves because, we just feel more comfortable. Like, would you ever just sell the satellite, or is it always the bundled package?
No, we do have business models where, we operate it on their behalf, but they essentially own the satellite or own the capacity of the satellite. There are also models where the operation also gets transferred and a customer will operate the satellite themselves. Now, that one is a very complex one for lots of different reasons. One of them being just the export laws in U.S. Exporting a satellite is really, really difficult. And the second piece is training the customer on how to operate the satellite. Is essentially you have to productize some internal tools that you've built to operate the constellation and be able to package that and provide it to them. So there are some customers that really want a variety, a flavor of these, and we have flexibility to work around those with those customers. And so in some cases, it's possible to do things like that.
Okay, but let's come back to the commercial customers, because this is fascinating, and we sort of touched upon it a little bit already. But I guess I have at least 2 questions about this. One is sort of the sales process, right? Because the government product, I mean, I'm probably oversimplifying it, but it kind of like probably almost sells itself just because it's so value added, like you said, for the national security use cases. As you pointed out, for commercial customers, you have to convince them of the value. So what does that sale process look like? Is that sort of, for example, is it in-house? Are you guys using resellers or partners? Like, I guess you're not doing agriculture, but I mean, it doesn't matter which industry vertical it is. Like, I guess in most industry verticals, there's sort of like, specialized consulting companies or data companies. Are you partnering with those? Are you going direct? Or what is the sales approach?
My head of sales, who's focused on government sales, would disagree with you on how easy it is to sell to government. It's not easy to sell into governments. I mean, it takes years. I think that one of the main challenges on the government side is they don't move fast, right? You're always programming your budget 2 years in advance. And so these sales cycles are extremely long. But once you get there, then you know that the customer has already spent resources and you're going to be there and you're going to grow with them. On the commercial side, they can move really, really fast, but the challenge remains on, you've got to be able to deliver something to them that's way beyond just an image. And it turns out, I think this is one of the main challenges that the industry as a whole is going through, is that, not a single data source is going to solve, big problems for any of these customers. And so you need SAR, you need optical, and you need other things that are not even from space. You need some data from their own sensors that no one has access to. It's proprietary to that customer. You need some terrestrial sensors, you need IoT, you need maybe other things. And combining all of this for a very specific problem set that a customer has and being able to solve that, not only from a technical standpoint, it's challenging, but putting that aside, even from just coordinating, all these different data providers to work nicely together. And, this is a big topic. We can expand on this, why that's complicated. Getting everyone together to work nice together such that by the time you add all of these different data sets, you still have a product that is a reasonable product in terms of cost and price for everyone involved, is extremely challenging. I don't think the industry has gotten there yet. And then, on top of that, you add all the product management required to get as close to the customer at the very end use case to be able to actually come up with what the problem is and what the solution is going to be. It gets really complicated really, really quickly. And I think let me know if this is interesting to talk about, but the challenge of finding a way where all the data providers from space are going to be able to work together nicely to come up with this product has not been solved, frankly. And I think that's a challenge for the industry. Until we figure that out, it's going to be extremely difficult to move forward with any of these commercial sectors in a big way.
I think it's a super interesting topic. You actually just gave me an idea, because we won't have the time to obviously flesh this out and do it any sort of justice today, right? I think maybe I'll do an episode where I invite somebody like you plus a couple of other guys from EO, maybe even somebody who does this terrestrially, maybe somebody from a big, terrestrial data company, just to have sort of a roundtable how we think we can and how we can and how we should approach this. But I agree. I think what you're talking about basically is, there's just too much friction in the system, right? There should be a lot like open source. Somebody should be able to just kind of, get the data from the various sources, put it together, fuse it. Ideally, there's sort of like automatic assistance in the fusing, and basically run analyses on top of that, right? But
well, if I may just say it in 1 minute, I think the system is not in equilibrium. And what I mean by that is you've got these data providers, and Capella is one of them, right? You've got the Capellas of the world, the planets of the world, the black skies of the world, the Hawkeyes of the world, where we are focused on building satellites and therefore the unique data. And our business is really, it requires a lot of capital to get to where it is today. And we want to be able to return that capital back to the investors. And so what we've promised the investors is this massive return on the investment they've put into the company. And so you have to be able to capture as much of the value as possible. Every single data provider that I know of wants to move into analytics and downstream. And that's just the way they believe they're going to be able to grow their revenue substantially outside of the government markets. Now, on the other side, you've got these analytics shops, the platform plays that don't have any data of themselves from their own satellites. They're not a satellite company, and they are doing analytics. And the data providers often think that these analytics companies are in competition with them. And the analytic companies are 100% dependent on the data from the data providers.
Sure.
And the data providers don't want to undercut their pricing that they're selling to governments, because that's where the premium customers are today. And for them to be able to get that data to these analytics companies at the price that these analytic companies can actually, bring data from a Capella and a Hawkeye and a Planet and a Black Sky and a Maxar, that price has to be so low, this analytics company to be able to grab 7 different data sources, add them together, and then be able to build a product that they can sell to commercial customers still at a really low price. That math doesn't add up. So what happens is the analytics companies give up on using high resolution data because they can't figure out the business model. The data providers already think that they're going to, at some point, compete with the analytics companies. And so there's already friction in that relationship. The analytics companies give up on the high resolution. They move into low resolution, free data. And the free data and the low resolution either is not recent enough, or the resolution is so low that you actually can't really get stuff out of it. And so then the product that they get out is not interesting to the commercial providers. Some of them go bankrupt, which we've now seen happen. And so now you've got, and then by the way, to add on top of this, all the data providers think that their data is the most important one, and they want to be the one that's like getting everyone's data together. So it's like a really unstable dynamic between the data providers and then the downstream partners.
So I guess, where do you think, how do you think this all plays out? And this is kind of, I guess, sort of a question on your vision on the industry. And I'm not just talking SaaS, sort of the larger EO sector, right? Where do you see this playing out? Are we going to have more horizontal consolidation? Are we going to have more vertical integration? Where's this all going?
Consolidation is going to happen. It's just a matter of time. And I think you're going to have consolidation both horizontally and vertically. You're going to have a lot of these analytics companies that are just going to go out of business because of this dynamic that I just explained.
Yeah.
You're going to have some of the data companies go out of business because, they either focused too much on commercial, and commercial didn't exist and they didn't get to the revenue. They were just not able to grow their revenue fast. And so they had to consolidate with someone else that could. And so you're going to have consolidation from both ends. I think if you hit the reset button in this industry, and there's absolutely zero company out there, and you hit the reset button, and you're starting from a fresh, clean canvas, the right way of doing this would be to have clusters of sensors. And the clusters of sensors are, we can discuss the buy versus build of, is this all one company operating each of those clusters, or each of these companies are contributing their sensor into the cluster? I would argue the latter sounds really nice, but it's practically impossible to get those companies to work together like that. But if you had a constellation built out of clusters of sensors, couple SAR in each of the clusters, you have couple SAR, you have an optical, you have RF, you have hyperspectral, and those clusters are actually systematically built and designed to work together. So from the get-go, the data is already coming in, already fused, and now you have an analytics that either is run separately, or the same operator of the cluster is also running the analytics. I think that's the equilibrium that we're going to get to. And how we get there is going to be crazy, because SPACs happen, and all of a sudden there's an exploration of who's going to get money and who's not, and who's bankrupt, and so I think we're a couple more cycles away from such an eventuality, but I think that's where we're heading as an industry.
And how do you see Capella, sort of like, what's your vision for the medium term in that scenario?
Well, I think in that cluster, SAR is going to be absolutely critical. SAR, given enough time, and I truly believe in this, given enough time, SAR is going to be the foundational data that is going to be used the most. And everything else is going to be to train models on SAR data. So optical, as an example, is fantastic to look at visually, because we're familiar with how optical images look like. but it's got all these issues with reliability, and you can't really use it all the time. And maybe you get a shot that's cloudy or not. But it's great for training models, because you can outsource the training. Everyone can look at an optical image and you can say this is a truck and this is a ship.
Sure.
You can't do that easily with SAR. So if you combine the optical and SAR and you train your SAR imagery based on the optical co-collection, perfect. Now you can transfer all those labels and all those models onto your SAR image. And now you're able to have the best collector in the world, and the most reliable collector in the world, already trained. And if you're at a point where all you got to do is identify, classify, extract, and generate change reports on things that you're looking at, which is where we're ultimately going to go, then you're going to use SAR because it's going to be the reliable one, and you're going to use other sensors to provide support. So SAR is critical, and what we built at Capella is the best SAR satellite in its class in terms of resolution, quality, and other things. And so we're going to be a critical piece of this puzzle, no matter how this thing shakes out. And so that's we have a pretty unique position.
You mentioned Spectre briefly, and you don't have that much time left. I did want to ask you a couple of questions on the financing side. So the first one is, I think you guys started in 2016. You said this was obviously, space was less focused on by a lot of investors than it is right now. So how was it like sort of trying to raise financing in 2016 for a SAR company?
2016, oh my God. I almost want to say, I haven't reflected on this, so this is a little, this might not be the most thoughtful response, but I almost want to say it was easier to raise in 2016 and 17 because, there were not that many data points. And I think now with the SPACs, the space companies that SPAC that are now publicly traded, there's a clear data point that all investors, whether they know space or not, are going to be able to use to judge new companies that want to get formed. And so people are going to look at the black sky trading number and where they're at. They're going to look at their multiples based on the revenue they have. They're going to look at their performance, and they're going to judge you whether you like it or not based on those public comps. The public comps did not exist a year before. Everything was private. And so you as an entrepreneur, you as a new company with a new cool, technology, you didn't have to build the case around why you were going to have to be valued differently than, where Black Sky or other space companies are being valued publicly. And that I think to some extent made the conversation easier. Now, if this was a case where all the space companies publicly were trading really, really high, more than everyone expected, your job would be easier. But it's not. So I think it's a little more complicated now than it was back in 2016. 2016, the pitch was, look, there's been successful optical companies in private markets. We're better than that because X, Y, and Z. And now you've got that public comp component added to the mix, which makes things a little more complicated.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. And in my day job as a VC, I think I've recently said more than once to people pitching to me that like, well, your publicly quoted peer has this market cap and you are asking a pre-money that's 3 times as much. How does that go together? And
I mean, it's like the market cap is 250 million and then they have 150 million in bank in cash. It's like, it makes no sense, but you can't expect to raise money at higher valuation than that in a non-liquid market. With higher risk. It's just a little crazy.
You mentioned SPAC a few times, and again, this could be a very long discussion by itself. But obviously, you during the SPAC, well, let's be nice and call it the SPAC boom, sort of late 2020 and first half of 2021. I mean, you guys were already a very prominent space company. If people were aware, you have a certain sort of funding need. SPAC was certainly, we were a very legitimate SPAC target. I think let's put it this way. You guys obviously decided not to SPAC. If you want to briefly talk about it, what was the thought process there?
Well, look, I think a lot of people use SPAC to raise money. That's what they use SPAC to raise money as opposed to using SPAC to go public. Like the end goal, the intention wasn't to go public. The intention was, oh shit, we can now raise capital.
Sure.
And if that was your intention and you were not ready to go public, it was actually a really bad idea. to do that. For us, when the SPAC boom happened in January of 21, we have just announced our commercial operation for our first satellite. And so, using the SPAC to go public, was probably not the right timing for a company like us at that time. And so, those are things that you have to consider, because, going public is not, it's not, it's not easy. I mean, you're not going to be judged every quarter, every day, frankly. And if you're not ready for it, it could be crushing. And we've seen that exact thing happen. It's just been crushing some companies.
Yeah, I think some of the other founders are realizing that right now. Just all sorts of implications, like your employee morale with the stock price down 80% and all of that. But yeah, it's a topic. It's a separate topic by itself. We're sort of coming towards the end here. Unfortunately, we could go on for hours, I guess. So I just wanted to ask you sort of some typical closing questions. One, just for the benefit of our listeners, are you guys hiring right now?
We are hiring like crazy. I mean, we have so many open positions. Anyone listening, I would encourage them to go on our website. I think we have more than 30 open positions, and we keep adding to it. Or reach out to me, either on LinkedIn or Twitter. Yeah, we're hiring a lot.
Terrific. Yeah, we'll put the link to Capella's job board in the in the show notes for everybody. And then the last two questions I always ask is, so one, the first one is, if you weren't doing Capella, but you're obviously fascinated by space in general, I think, what else would you be doing right now in space?
In space in particular?
Yeah, in the space sector.
That's a good question. It's hard for me to answer that. Just I've been super focused on Capella, but
sure,
there are many exciting things happening. I think one area that I'm really excited about is manufacturing in space. Whether it's low Earth orbit or in other areas, but being able to manufacture things in space and take advantage of microgravity is really exciting to me.
And is that in space to bring back to Earth, or in space to use in space, or both?
Both areas. I think in space and bring back to Earth is going to become practical from a cost standpoint fairly soon. And then in space, to actually be used in space, there's some neat applications around that as well. So both of them are pretty exciting, I think.
Yeah, actually, as a venture fund, we're super excited about in-space manufacturing. So totally agree on that. And the traditional last question is science fiction. Payam, do you like science fiction? And if so, what are some of your favorite works? And it could be book, TV, movie, anything.
I'm not a big science fiction person. I have yet to watch Matrix and Star Wars and any of those, which is I always get a lot of people are just confused, including my friends, why I've not watched those. But I'm a big Carl Sagan fan, and there's one book that he has that's you could call it science fiction, and it's Contact. That one I've enjoyed, but I'm not a big sci-fi person.
Okay, so let me then. Okay, I'll modify the question. Because one thing that sprung to my mind, because we're talking about SAR, and one of the really big advantages that you can see through cloud cover. I mean, do you ever think in the future, some point in time, there could be a Capella satellite helping us to peek through the cloud cover at Venus?
Absolutely. I mean, we need SAR satellites around other planets. I mean, it's I think if you want to have a very precise map, a 3-dimensional map. You want to have SAR satellites on other planets as well. And by the way, NASA has launched, radar sensors to other planets. So this is not a new thing. But having a constellation to be able to have that capability on other planets, I think is going to be vital. So absolutely.
Terrific. Well, I think that's a great note to end on. So we're looking forward to that. Payam, thanks so much for coming on. Best of luck with Capella and its future plans. And maybe we'll talk again in a little while.
Thanks for having me. Look forward to our next conversation.
And that's a wrap for another nominal episode of the Space Business Podcast. Once more, if you enjoyed this, please leave us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast platforms such as Apple or Spotify. You can follow us on Twitter at podcast_space. You can support us at
www.patreon.com/spacebusinesspodcast. Lastly, if you have any feedback, including ideas for guests, and that may include yourself if you have an interesting space story to tell, or interested in being a sponsor, drop us an email at spacebusinesspodcast@gmail.com. See you for the next episode.